Welcome, everybody. This is Marcel, the Canadian journalist, formerly Ernie Racing News. Today is November 18th, 2024. We are in very, very dangerous times thanks to the U.S. Biden neocons administration putting a last-ditch effort for their military-industrial complex, pushing closer to World War III on purpose. Why? Why would they do this? Well, we can only speculate beyond the military-industrial complex, beyond the $15 trillion industry per year of making weapons, creating problems, putting people at risk. Certainly, certain cities in the USA will be at risk of a nuclear missile thanks to what's going on right now. So, unnamed sources say that President Biden has given Ukraine authorization to use long-range weapons to strike Russia after promising the American people that he would never do that because it would lead to World War III. Ukraine President Zelensky said on X that this has not been approved, but it is on his Christmas wish list and has been for over 2 decades. 2 years. Yeah. One of the key elements is providing our army with long-range capabilities, end quote. He wrote, quote, there has been much said in the media today that we have received approval to take relative actions, but strikes are not carried out with words. These things are not announced. The missiles will speak for themselves, end quote. Yeah, wonderful. New York Times reports that allowing Ukrainians to use the long-range missiles known as the Army Tactical Missile System, the ATACMS, came in response to Russia's surprise decision to bring North Korean troops into the fight, officials said. There has not been yet proof that North Korean troops are fighting for Ukraine, and North Korea has denied it. Why would the New York Times report this from unnamed sources? This would mean that the Biden administration wants an escalation of the war with Russia before the Trump administration could negotiate an end to the war. Suspicious, right? So when looking up the nuclear doctrine, Russia's had a few updates, and we'll go over those, and we'll find the previous one from 2020, and the new 2024 version this September is just from his speech. We can't find it in writing. We can't find it in writing yet. So here's a story by Alexander Gabov from October 3rd. Russian President Putin has announced imminent changes to the country's nuclear doctrine. Those changes announced in public comments at the start of the Security Council meeting on September 25th amount to a lowering of the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. The specific wording of the new version of the doctrine will only be known once the corresponding decree is published, but Putin listed the main innovations in his short speech. The first proposal is that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but, quote, with the participation or support, end quote, of a nuclear one, should be considered a joint attack. So you have Ukraine, who's a non-nuclear state, who's being funded, supported. Participation with the USA, who is a nuclear state, means that's a joint attack. So it counts. The second defines the conditions for the possible use of nuclear weapons. Moscow will be prepared to use them, quote, upon receipt of reliable information of a massive launch of air and space attack weapons and their crossings of the state border, end quote, including strategic and tactical aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, and hypersonic aircraft. Finally, nuclear weapons may be used in response to an attack on Russia and Belarus using conventional weapons if that attack poses, quote, critical threat to sovereignty, end quote, under the current version of Russia's nuclear deterrence policy, approved by Putin in June of 2020, just 4 years ago. But in a very different pre-war era, Moscow was only prepared to use nuclear weapons in response to an attack using conventional weapons, specifically against the Russian Federation, and only in cases, quote, when the very existence of the state is threatened, end quote. Now let's go find the actual doctrine from that. Oh, get out of here. So, Russia's nuclear weapons doctrine, forces, and modernization. Here's from the Congressional Research Service, updated April 21st, 2022. And it goes into quite the details about what they've done, the history, and everything. You can see the contents here, guys. But we're going to go ahead to up to a page, Russia's nuclear forces, and I think it was page 14 or 12. On page 11, Russia's nuclear doctrine, evolving doctrine. Russia has altered and adjusted the Soviet nuclear doctrine to meet the circumstances of the post-Cold War world. In 93, Russia explicitly rejected the Soviet Union's no first use pledge, in part because of the weakness of its conventional forces at the time. Russia has subsequently revised its military doctrine and national security concepts several times over the past few decades, with successive versions in the 1990s appearing to place a greater reliance on nuclear weapons. For example, the national security concept issued in 97 allowed for the use of nuclear weapons, quote, in case of a threat of the existence of the Russian Federation as an independent sovereign state, end quote. The military doctrine published in 2000 expanded the circumstances in which Russia might use nuclear weapons, including in response to attacks using weapons of mass destruction against Russia or its allies, as well as in response to, quote, large-scale aggression utilizing conventional weapons in situations critical to the national security of the Russian Federation, end quote. These revisions have led to questions about the Russias would employ nuclear weapons preemptively in a regional war or only in response to the use of nuclear weapons in a broader conflict. In mid-2009, Petrusev Nikola, the head of the Russia Security Council, hinted that Russia would have the option to launch, quote, a preemptive nuclear strike against an aggressor, quote, using conventional weapons in an all-out regional or even local war. However, when Russia updated its military doctrine in 2010, it did not specifically provide for the preemptive use of nuclear weapons. Instead, the doctrine stated that Russia, quote, reserves the right to utilize nuclear weapons in response to the utilization of nuclear and other types of weapons of mass destruction against it or its allies, and also in the event of aggression against the Russian Federation, involving the use of conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is under threat, end quote. Compared with the 2000 version, which allowed for nuclear use, quote, in situations critical to the national security of the Russian Federation, end quote. This change seemed to narrow the conditions for nuclear weapons use. The language on nuclear weapons in Russia's most current 2014 doctrine is similar to that of 2010. Now, in early of June 2020, Russia released a new document titled, quote, on basic principles of state policy of the Russian Federation on nuclear deterrence, that outlined the threats and circumstances that could lead to Russia's use of nuclear weapons. This document specifically notes that Russia considers, quote, nuclear weapons exclusively as a means of deterrence, end quote. It states that Russia's nuclear deterrent policy is, quote, is defensive by nature. It is aimed at maintaining the nuclear force's potential at the level sufficient for nuclear deterrence and guarantees protection of national sovereignty and territorial integrity of the state and deterrence of a potentially adversary from aggressive against the Russian Federation or its allies, end quote. It emphasizes that Russia maintains forces that could, quote, inflict guaranteed unacceptable damage on a potential adversary in any circumstances. So, I mean, we could go on forever, guys. This is a massive document. But what you also got to remember is you go back to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, when the U.S. bombed the citizens of Japan during World War II. Was the U.S. under existential threat? Was the U.S.'s sovereignty under existential threat of being destroyed? It wasn't, right? The U.S. actually used them preemptively as an attack, not as a defense, to attack Japan and just wipe them out of the war, right? One and then another. And they're not killing military targets. This is all civilian, destroyed people, homes, lives, everything. It's just a massive, massive decision to murder all of these civilians in Japan. And obviously it did shut down Japan at the war, but it wasn't a conventional warfare where you're attacking only military targets, which is the military code. It is attacking civilians. Just imagine it. Let's just bomb all of the citizens of a country and not military targets whatsoever to end, start, whatever you want. So their doctrine is in full defense. But what that means is when the U.S. approves weapons for their partner in Ukraine, and the U.S. is a nuclear state and it's partnered with Ukraine and gives Ukraine these weapons, and Britain gives them these weapons to attack into the heart of Russia, they're saying that's the no-go, that's the red line. If you shoot missiles into Russia And it's not going to be just like you're hitting an arms facility that's creating weapons. It's going to hit civilians. And Ukraine has already done this in small, stupid scales with little drones, just hitting like apartment buildings, killing a few people here and there. Just pathetic little attacks that do nothing besides injure and kill civilians. But now they're talking actual missiles that could go into orbit and come down. And they're threatening the existence of the world right now. The U.S. is putting everything on the line for their military industrial neocons. Last minute, they'll do anything before they lose power. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Later down, what are your thoughts on this? Is this like the most dangerous time of all? There is a nuclear countdown clock. You can probably search it up. I haven't looked for it recently, but it's never been higher. It's whatever it is. It's like 99 out of 100. The worst scenario we've ever been in for nuclear fallout war. Thanks for watching. Cheers.